Good evening, everyone. I am Ruth Ross, CEO of Shropshire Chamber. Welcome to our business Hustings. Beautiful venue. I'm going to hand over to Carl. There are no fire drills, and do not worry, it is at Aico. So we will have early warning. So I'm going to hand over to Carl, and he's going to host us.
Thanks very much, Ruth, and good evening. Welcome, everybody, and a big thanks to the team at Aico for hosting us tonight, and a big thanks to all our candidates as well. I think we've got pretty much every part of Shropshire covered here this evening. Just to let you know how we're going to work this tonight, the questions that we're going to look at have basically come from three different sources. The Chamber's own Going for Growth manifesto, which was published a few weeks ago, and which all the candidates have had a copy of. The Chamber's latest economic surveys, which are done quarterly and reveal everything from training to skills and lots more issues besides. And then also we've had a few questions from members and stakeholders that they wanted. We have a big long list here, and I'm going to try and get through as much as we possibly can tonight. If anybody's got any questions during the course of the evening, please do just put your hand up, because Alex at the back from the Chamber has got a microphone which he will get to you. You'll see that the event is being filmed tonight, so all we'd ask is, if you are asking a question, please do just wait till the microphone comes to you so that we can all hear what you're saying. So I'd like to, without further ado, welcome the panel that we've got tonight. Representing the Labour Party, we have Ro Jacobi from Labour for the Wrekin. We have Julian Dean from the Green Party from Shrewsbury. We have Helen Morgan from the Liberal Democrats from North Shropshire, Daniel Kowczynski from the Conservative Party from Shrewsbury, and Alan Adams from Reform, representing Telford. Now, what I'd like to do before we get to the first question is just give you an opportunity to give us a quick 60-second background into who you are, what you stand for, what you're about. And since you're nearest to me, Ro, shall we start with you? Do you want to grab yourself a microphone? Just tell us a little bit about you and why you're standing and what you believe in. Press it once and it goes green. That's
yes,
it.
It is green now. So it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed my drive to here. But my story goes a long way. I was born in Afghanistan. Is the grammar correct? So I just want to make sure that I don't get deported for not speaking the English properly. So I was born in Afghanistan in the central highlands of the country called the Hazarajat. I became a refugee. My father was an anti-Soviet commander and then an anti-Taliban commander. And once the Taliban managed to take over, I became a refugee. I was kidnapped and tortured, and the rest of it, I became a refugee and spent time as a child refugee in Iran and Pakistan, worked on construction sites, building sites, and factories and sweatshops, and then arrived in Britain in November 2004 as a refugee. And so I owe a lot to this country, and again, starting life here, couldn't speak English. I had my first job in the Wrekin, Epson, the ink cartridges factory. That's where I started my work, and the fact that I'm able to speak English is also started there because I didn't have the language skills to go to somewhere else, and I made a deal with a colleague to teach me English during our break times in return for £5. So that really worked out well because it led me to go to university, study politics, and work with international, national organizations, leaders, and do all sorts of stuff. And I hope that is my 60-second.
That was 90 seconds, but I'll let you off. We'll give everybody 90 seconds now. Let's move along the line. Julian, you'll go. You have 90 seconds as well, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Julian Dean, I'm the Green Party candidate in Shrewsbury. My background is that I spent my first 5 years of my career was actually working in local government in housing and dealing with homelessness in East London for a while. Then I retrained to teach. I taught music for 20 years, or a little bit longer than that, and much of that was in Telford. I taught at the Sixth Form College in Telford, vocational music, which I think will be of interest when we get to talking about skills. I want to get straight to the point, which is that along with probably about 3/4 of the population, I'm going to be pleased to see the back of the Tory government in a few weeks' time. So the real question is going to be, what sort of government will we end up with? So the message I want to bring tonight is that we need real change. And I don't think Labour is really offering that. So the Greens will be working to push for that real change, to unlock the wealth which is definitely in this country and which is available for public services and for the sort of investment that we need, which unfortunately the two big parties are simply refusing to access because of their, on the one hand, austerity rules, on the other hand, fiscal lock rules, both of which are fairly ridiculous. So that's what I think we need to be doing, is unlocking that wealth to really drive the green investment that we need.
Thank you, Julian. Excellent. Thank you. Helen.
Thank you very much. My name's Helen Morgan. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for North Shropshire, and you might be aware that I've been the MP here for the last 2.5 years, so not a full term. My background is that I trained as a chartered accountant with KPMG down in London and stayed there until I was an audit manager. Then I moved to work for Centrica plc, where I became the head of UK financial reporting, and then moved into British Gas, where I was head of margin forecasting. So some experience in some big businesses. When I moved to Shropshire, I became the financial controller of a small family-run group of businesses, and they had a range of sectors represented, so agriculture, hospitality, construction, and property development and management. So I've got a broad background in business. As an MP, I've tried to speak to as many businesses as possible across Shropshire of all different sizes. And the key issues that have come up time and time again have been a lack of access to skilled staff, a lack of infrastructure, and high input costs, and for those businesses on the high street, business rates. So those are my kind of top issues for businesses in Shropshire, and the ones that I will be focusing on if I have the privilege of being re-elected to serve people here.
Thanks, Helen. Daniel.
Well, I'm Daniel Kuczynski, the Conservative candidate for Shrewsbury and the first ever Polish-born British Member of Parliament. But what I find fascinating over the last 19 years serving Shrewsbury, the House of Commons, is just how few. There's just a handful of us. There are 650 members of Parliament, but just a handful of us who studied business studies at university and worked in private commerce. I've come from a background of exports, helping British companies and Danish companies to export to the Middle East. I do my job by focusing on the top four infrastructure projects, which I consider will have a disproportionately advantageous economic impact on Shrewsbury. And I use my position in the House of Commons to try to get those 4 projects across the finishing line. If any of you are interested in what those 4 projects are, and I hope we can talk about some of them during the course of this debate, they are worth £1 billion, 1,000 million pounds. These are projects which are going to transform Shrewsbury. And of course, if Shrewsbury is doing well, the county town will do well. So I've used my business education at university and my commercial experience to try to focus on those 4 projects. And the Green candidate has already tried to denigrate the Conservative Party. Let me just reply by saying we all know what happens when the Greens get into office. We've just seen it in Scotland with the chaos and economic damage that has resulted in their being in government.
Thank you, Daniel. And Alan, make sure we're on green and we're good to go.
Hi, my name's Alan Adams. I'm the Reform UK candidate. It's very important you say UK. I'm standing for Telford. I'm a born and bred Telford. I'm an ex-submariner. When I left the Navy, I was in the Navy in the latter part of the Cold War on subs. When I left the Navy, I went into maintenance work. I've worked in factories across the borough. And the last 10 years, I've been a business consultant helping small businesses, SMEs, to actually grow their business. I'm a disaffected Tory, I'm afraid. All I was hearing in Telford was, I'm not voting. My stepdad actually said he was going to go, a long-term Conservative, said he was going to go into the polls and actually spoil his paper rather than cast a vote. So I decided that this is the right thing to do, to step up. I'm not a politician. This is way outside my comfort zone. So that's me.
Thank you very much. Well, the first topic that I want to look at tonight is the one that was by far and away the most popular in all of the different sources we've used tonight, and that's around skills. The Chamber's quarterly economic survey continues to show, and has shown now for over a year, that companies are struggling to recruit staff with the skills that they need. It's been the #1 priority. So the question I want to pose to the panel really is, what's the answer? I'm going to start, Helen, I'll start with you because you mentioned skills specifically, didn't you?
Thank you very much. I don't think there is a single answer to the skills problem that we face in Shropshire, but we do know that we have a shortage of younger people staying in the county and working here. So I think there are a number of different issues we can use to address that. So one is just making sure that young people stay in the area. And to do that, we need to address some of the infrastructure challenges that are apparent. So whether that's housing, public transport, I think is quite important in terms of moving people around between different towns so that people can access a job that matches their skill set. Digital connectivity is obviously a key issue that's come up time and time again. And it's an issue that causes people to move away from the area. One of the top things people do when they look on Rightmove for a house is check the broadband speed. And if it's rubbish, it's difficult to attract people to come and stay in the area. So there's a lot of different infrastructure elements that we could do to retain our young people. But we also need to address this problem of skills. And in order to do that, we need to work closely between businesses and educational establishments. And one of the things I was doing before Parliament was dissolved was trying to connect some businesses in Oswestry with North Shropshire College to look at how we make sure that the colleges are delivering the skills people need. But we also need to make sure that people are retraining throughout their lives, so where their skills start to become obsolete. So, for example, if you're a gas fitter, are you retraining to be able to fit air source heat pumps and new types of technology? We need to be able to access and ensure that we're accessing retraining for people throughout their lives, which has always been a key Lib Dem policy, so that we are making sure that the skills gaps are met.
Thank you, Helen. Daniel, let me just pass over to you. One of the things that comes out of this as well is there's a difference between academic skills and soft skills that are needed as well, isn't there, among the workforce? Soft skills are such an important and sometimes maybe overlooked area.
What it all boils down to, every politician has their own priorities. My main priority and my passion is something that nobody ever talks to me about on the doorstep, and that's balancing the books. And you have to balance the books as businesses, and sometimes you have to make very difficult decisions to balance the books. You also have to do that in your own households. And yet we are now 2.7 or 2.8 trillion pounds in debt. Debt interest payments this year are over 100 billion pounds. That's twice as much as we spend on our armed forces. And when we came into office in 2010, we were handed a note by the Labour Party. Good luck, there's no money left. We were borrowing 183 billion pounds a year in 2010 when we came into office. And every single year for the first 9 years, we reduced the annual deficit so that in 2019, this country was running a balanced budget. Can you imagine running a balanced budget? The United Kingdom paying for herself for the first time since Margaret Thatcher. And that is so important because we've seen what's happened to other European countries, like Greece, like Italy, like Portugal, like others, who have racked up massive deficits and then struggle to actually pay them and to be competitive. So whether it's skills or anything else, the United Kingdom needs to run a balanced budget. Unfortunately, the situation is very difficult at the moment because during the pandemic, and when I came back to my constituency, everybody was out, quite rightly, for that part of the furlough. We had to borrow 450 billion pounds. That has blown a massive black hole in the state of public finances. And what really worries me is the Labour government with a large majority that will pander to the trade unions, increase taxation, increase workers' rights, and blunt Britain's competitive edge. And let's not forget, we have just become the world's 4th largest exporter. How a tiny island of our size has managed to become the world's 4th largest exporter, you could write a dissertation on that. These are tremendous achievements.
Okay, Daniel, let's get back to the original question, which is about skills and how we actually help companies who are struggling to recruit staff with the skills that they need. Ro, I know you want to come in here.
A bit of an opportunity to answer to some of what Daniel just said.
Make sure keep the mic close.
You'd need to be quite faceless to claim that we've had a decade of stability and growth in this country. I have been to some of the most dangerous places on earth. Stability, political stability, is the cornerstone of economic growth. That's what we've not had from you. When Daniel says he stands for British businesses, you'd need to ask him, do you stand for British businesses in Shropshire or Saudi businesses? You're about standing up for Saudis, while we're here talking about businesses and their future in Shropshire. Who gave us Liz Truss? You did. Who gave us COVID parties? You did. Who gave us unprecedented cost of living crisis? You did. Who gave us 10% inflation per year? You did.
Let's get back to the skills question, though.
You're in no position to lecture us, the Labour Party, on economic prudence and economic credibility. You've made the country a pariah. We want to change that. Britain needs change, and Britain needs a Labour government to bring stability, credibility, and competence.
Julian, do you want to tackle the skills question for us?
Yes, I want to.
They're going to give Julian a word. We'll come back to you later.
Yes, I mean, frankly, it's insulting to those who are asking questions tonight if the two main parties are simply going to say what they were going to say anyway. So let's go back to skills. So I mean, the first thing to say is that this country has the lowest levels of training and retraining of any industrialised country. So whatever record Daniel wants to claim, that's the record when it comes to training. At the same time, we know that the nature of work is constantly changing, and that therefore the idea that you can be trained for a job for life is simply no longer the case. So therefore, we need to focus on what are transferable skills. And I think it's a real shame that the Gove reforms to education effectively took a pot shot at vocational training. And as a vocational teacher, I taught in music, but I very quickly moved towards teaching effectively events management in Telford College. And that was a fantastic course because it was both interesting for the students because they were committed to the world of popular music, but it was also delivering transferable skills in logistics, in finance, in project management, in all those sorts of things. And I know that many of them, and in fact this is the case with most students, will have gone into a different sector. Most students who cover a vocational course or train in whatever subject they train in very quickly shift to a different sector. So we have to take that really seriously, and therefore we have to really build a foundation of, yes, soft skills, and that means not turning schools into exam factories, but turning them into places where people can engage with each other, talk to each other, communicate, work in teams. That's the sort of education that builds those soft skills. And then at the same time, take vocational education seriously, but recognise that the very specific skills for the specific jobs of today may well not be the skills we need in 5 or 10 years' time. And therefore take seriously that there are some real transferable skills out there which can be taken seriously in education. And finally, that all of that means breaking down the false divide between brain and brawn, if you like, between academic education and vocational education. Both are massively valuable to the individuals and valuable to society as a whole.
Thank you very much. Alan?
Yeah, so obviously skills is really important for businesses. They're all struggling. We need to do a bit of a PR job on apprenticeships. I think they're a fantastic route for young adults to take. There seems to be a push for universities, and they're going into sort of really low quality degrees. So yeah, the push on the construction, IT, engineering, make it more of a focus within the schools. And as for the soft skills, it's giving kids the understanding and how they come across. I was talking to a manager the other day, and he spent all afternoon interviewing. He said, and it was for a 6 till 2 shift, and one girl came in flip-flops and just a T-shirt, and he said, why? But it's those sorts of things that we need to help the kids with, so that they can understand how they come across in workplace and make them employable in the first place.
You mentioned apprenticeships there, actually, Alan, because it's been reported, I noticed this week, that the number of people taking apprenticeships in our area, Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin, is down nearly 40% in the last 18 months. I read one survey. How do we reverse that?
Again, it's just, I suppose, making them aware. I mean, the Royal Navy, I went through an apprenticeship, and it really does give you the skills to sort of push yourself forward. And it's that confidence it gives you. It teaches you stuff. The mentorship, the youngsters don't seem to have mentors these days, and that's what apprenticeships did for me anyway.
Anybody else want a word on apprenticeships specifically? So, go on, Daniel. Daniel.
I mean, the reason I talk about, specifically about the reason I answer the skills question about talking about the deficit and about making sure you run a balanced budget is because all of this costs money. And whether it's investing in new teachers, whether it's investing in new universities or technical colleges or all the rest of it, takes a huge amount of money. I've just spent the afternoon in the square talking to parents with teachers with special educational needs and hearing about the hardship that they face every day as a result of a lack of investment in helping them. All of this takes huge amount of money. Yes, we are the world's 5th largest economy, but we have been through some horrendously difficult economic destabilizing situations, particularly the pandemic where we had to borrow £450 billion. And that's why having low taxation, low corporation tax, low personal income tax is so important to make us globally competitive and make sure we continue to be the world's 4th largest exporter. That's why I'm very pleased Mr. Sunak has reduced taxation and is lowering inflation. And we've got to keep on the pro-business agenda in order to keep that competitive edge, something which I simply can't believe would happen under a Labour government. And let's not forget one point. No Labour government, not one, has reduced unemployment. Perhaps 1 or 2 may have faced a particularly difficult situation. But in the history of this country, not a single Labour government has left office with unemployment lower than when it came into office.
Well, let me give Ro an opportunity to come back on that one then, Daniel, and also tackle the issue. Do you feel that, how do we halt the trend that means fewer people are taking up apprenticeships? And if you do want to respond.
It's a bit rich, having been in power for 14 years, having been propped up Boris Johnson, having been propped up Liz Truss. Yeah, the issue is Liz Truss. The issue is 14 years of failure.
Actually, the question was apprenticeships, yes, but there we go.
The issue is that, because, look, the issue is you. The issue is your party. The issue is your lack of respect for people. Let me tell you what we're going to do. The reason that the leader has, and your leader lied yesterday, if you remember.
Outrageous.
That's not outrageous, that's the truth.
If somebody accused somebody of lying in the House of Commons, the Speaker would have ruled that out.
Yeah, if you could stop shouting at me. If you could... No.
Listen, let's stick to the questions, folks, here. We've got...
Let me...
We've got a lot to get through tonight, so let's stick to the agendas.
You know that. I've lived in some of the worst places on earth where... And you worked for Saudi Arabia. And that is quite autocratic. Yes, of course you have. But it is an affront. You know, I value democracy. People died. We had in D-Day. People died to give us the democracy we have today. Now, to sit here in front of the very people and lie to their faces is an affront to decency and democracy. We deserve better than that. We deserve better than the 14 years of failure.
Okay,
I'm going to the apprenticeship. I met a teenager yesterday in Sheafnell. She came up to me because I was wearing my rosette and looked at me and said, "Are you the Labour person?" I said, "Yes." "Go and sort out our school." "What's wrong with your school?" She said, "Our school is in special measures. It has been for a long time, but we don't have any teachers." Imagine, that's the story of not just one school, that's the story of tens of schools, hundreds of schools. Hospitals, you've left hospitals in ruins. You've left our public services in ruins. Of course, these are not coming for free, but you've bankrupted the economy. 40 plus days of Liz Truss, 46 billions of pounds.
Okay, we've gone over that one already. Let me give Julian an opportunity. Just tell me about the apprenticeships question specifically. How do we halt it?
I just wanted to mention one thing about apprenticeships, which is I'm really, really concerned that we are losing, in particular, the opportunity for people to train on apprenticeships in social work and in nursing, and also some teacher training because of the withdrawal of Chester University from Shropshire. I think that's a real loss to the county. It's a loss to the town of Shrewsbury, and you know, I think it's a testimony to the failure of the government to invest adequately in higher education and in training. And I think that's, you know, we are desperate for those skilled workers. So it is about money. Absolutely, it is about money. The truth is, the money is there. We are the 5th wealthiest country in the world, and there are millionaires and billionaires who, frankly, are not paying enough in tax, and there are international companies like Amazon that are not paying enough in tax, and that money is available for us. But both of the major parties are simply refusing to tackle the issue that we can actually raise the extra money to tackle the infrastructure issues that we have, the education system that we have, and to bring about the transition we need to bring about if we're going to have a future.
Helen?
Thanks. I just wanted to address specifically the question about apprenticeships, because the businesses here will all be paying the apprenticeship levy, and they will be expecting to get some value for money from that levy. And it doesn't work very well at the moment. It's very inflexible. And if you're on the border here between Wales and England, where there are different rules in how you can spend that levy between the two countries, then it's even more bureaucratic and nightmarish for the companies involved. So I think we need to have a look at the apprenticeship levy, make it simple, make it more flexible, and also increase the employment allowance so that small businesses aren't paying national insurance on people who are at that lower end of employment, so they can increase their workforces. But it's very important to emphasise that unemployment isn't our problem here in Oswestry. We've got very, very low levels of unemployment. Our problem is enough people to fill the jobs and get the businesses growing. And we can't deal with any of these problems of a stagnant economy and underinvestment in public services unless we have economic growth. So it's really, really important to listen to business, work out what it is they need to get the people in their businesses to do the jobs, and make sure that we can ensure that those businesses thrive in the future.
Thank you. So before we move off skills, anybody got any questions or comments that they'd like to add into the debate? Okay, we'll move on. Let's move on. A couple of you have mentioned this already before, and that's the connectivity issue. I mean, I don't know about you, I sometimes find it impossible to make a mobile phone call when I'm driving from one side of Shropshire to the other without losing signal. Some parts of the county, we know very rural corners don't have access to high-speed broadband. So I want to just ask really the panellists, where you feel our infrastructure sits in terms of how easy it is to allow businesses to compete on an equal footing with some of the more urban parts of the UK. Ro, do you want to start us off with this?
I mean, we have tragically fallen behind our peers and competitors on many fronts. You look at connectivity, service sector on the economy, all sorts of things. Now, on connectivity especially, given where we are at the moment, I'm a bit of an IT geek. I know Daniel would say Rishi Sunak's an IT geek, but he can't even use a wireless payment card. But on the connectivity, now, I'm just going to give you an example. I was in Kabul, Afghanistan in April 2021. I went to the villages around the Afghan capital. You were meant to be having the worst mobile signals there. It was showing me 3G, but I could watch a YouTube video. You go around Shifnal, you go around Albrighton, around here, it shows 5G. But it's not loading a simplest video. Now, we're talking about connectivity. Businesses require fast broadband. It's not to be seen, not to be felt. We're talking about AI, the evolution of AI. We cannot harness any of those benefits that we're always talking about. Connectivity, future of, other countries are talking about 6G. We're not even getting 4G right or 5G right. So, the fact that the Tories have not done it for 14 years, you'd need to be holding them accountable as to why. You've been having power, you've wasted our money, you've squandered 14 years of opportunities of this country. It's time to change that. And change is only possible when you have people in charge who are not busy fighting each other, stabbing each other in the back, day in, day out, but are governing for the interest of the party. Shropshire needs a Labour government. Shropshire needs a science and technology centre supporting its telecommunication services. We need our companies working together, businesses working together to find a solution that is viable, that is fit for the future and also fit for our children. You go around schools, they don't have access to proper ITs. You cannot talk about AI or any future IT projects without having proper connectivity.
Thank you. Alan, talk to me about connectivity. How do you see it?
Obviously it's very important. Being from Telford, we don't really have that issue. Everything's sort of super fast. So I'll leave it to the other candidates to answer that question. Absolutely. Okay.
Julian, go on. Give us a Shrewsbury perspective then. We've got two Shrewsburys against one Telford here tonight.
Yeah, so. I will try and address the whole question of Shropshire, though, because I think that this question gets to the heart of how do we overcome the the difference in opportunity, unequal difference in opportunity between urban and rural areas. And I think that the broadband connectivity is one part of that. And I think the solution is simple. It requires, significant investment. A small charge on everybody's phone line across the country would allow that level of investment so that everybody can have the levels of broadband, which frankly, you can have in Estonia. I don't understand why we can't have it in the UK. So I think that investment is possible. It can be done. It's about raising the money and being brave enough to do that. But there are other ways that we can equalise the opportunities and the connectivity in rural areas. And I think that a key one is public transport. Interestingly, I'm sure at some stage Daniel is going to promote his disastrous North West Relief Road project. But interestingly, when we heard from people from the business chamber at one meeting recently, I'm a Shropshire councillor and I was in a meeting, and they were asked, how keen are you on the North West Road? And actually, do you know what they said? We need better bus services. We need young workers to be able to get to their jobs. That's the sort of connectivity that I really think we could be investing in. So that's part of the story as well. So I think all the way from broadband to a really good bus service in this county, which can allow people to travel in a sustainable way, to work, to get those opportunities, to training. Those are the things I think that we need to be investing in to overcome that gap, which is a real gap between the urban and the rural experience, especially for young people, but frankly, for all of us. I mean, one of the things that I think we sometimes forget is that even in rural areas, not everybody has a car. And in those households where there is a car, not everyone has access to the car keys. And we do have to overcome that. And the only way we can overcome that is with a much, much better public transport system, and then a bit of imaginative thinking about car clubs and shared vehicles and what's called total transport. In other words, the fact that we have vehicles running around the county, taking kids to school or delivering post, but then they're not available for people to travel in as well. Actually, there's solutions you can bring about with that. Some of that involves a little bit of clever tech, but actually those total transport solutions are being piloted in all sorts of places around the world, and we should be doing that in counties like Shropshire.
Thanks, Stuart. Okay, I'll give Daniel a chance to respond to some of those specific things in a minute. But just Helen, just give us your take first on the connectivity specifically, and obviously we'll broaden it out into more of the infrastructure debate, I think, as well.
So thank you. So digital connectivity is probably the top issue in Shropshire after health, I would say. Certainly on my travels around the county, talking to both people who have a problem from a domestic perspective and for people who run a business. There are two elements. Obviously, there's your broadband, your fixed line, and then there's your mobile connectivity, and they are different beasts. In North Shropshire, we're lucky enough to be benefiting from Project Gigabit, which should resolve a lot of the broadband issues. It hasn't been rolled out yet, but it is in train, and I hope that is a success, and I'm entirely supportive of it. The mobile signal problem is different, and it is supposed to be being resolved by something called the Shared Rural Network, which is a government project which required the 4 mobile network operators to put £500 million into solving the issue of partial not spots, so places where you can only get one signal from one provider, and where the government would put £500 million into total not spots, which are largely identified as being in Scotland and Wales, so possibly not of as much interest to us here in North Shropshire. There is a big problem with this project in that, firstly, the data for that project is based on Ofcom's coverage maps, and anybody who lives in a rural part of Shropshire will know that they do not reflect the lived reality of people on the ground. I live in Harmer Hill, which is supposed to have pretty good coverage, and I work in Wen, which is supposed to have pretty good coverage when I'm in my constituency office, and they're both awful. You can't make a phone call when you drive down the A5 from Oswestry to Shrewsbury. The maps are not fit for purpose. But the problem is the contract has been drawn up based on those maps. And secondly, EE, which owns more of the infrastructure than any other business, didn't reach an agreement to share its infrastructure with the other mobile network operators. So there's a problem there as well. So I've run quite a long campaign on this. I've met with all of the mobile network operators. I've met with the local government authority who are trying to, association, who are trying to resolve this problem as well. And I've done a private members bill, which would require those operators to share their equipment more effectively between each other, but also if they won't agree or can't reach commercial terms on that, to allow rural roaming where your phone hooks up to the signal that is available to you. We need to resolve this problem because it isn't only important to run a decent business, and we're all working flexibly and on the move in our businesses now. So it's mission critical for businesses, but it's also important for resilience in power cuts and storms, for example. Absolutely the most important part of digital connectivity that hasn't been addressed. And if I have the honour of being re-elected, I will continue to campaign for that as a top priority, not just for North Shropshire, but for the whole of rural Britain.
Daniel.
Well, this is when Owen Patterson was the MP for North Shropshire, and also Philip Dunn, the MP for Ludlow. I mean, one thing is absolutely clear: you can't resolve this by yourself as a member of Parliament. You've got to work with other Shropshire MPs collaboratively. One of the biggest problems that we have, I think, is that our county is not united. Our county has been artificially cut up, Shropshire and Telford. And one of the things that I would love to have is an amalgamation of both councils and just to have one council for the whole of Shropshire. Because every time you are negotiating with a government department or with a national body, you've got Norfolk in front of you, you've got Somerset behind you, they go in collectively. And my experience of being the MP for Shrewsbury for the last 19 years is that is not the case in Shropshire. And every time we go in, this divide between Telford and the rest of Shropshire is very counterintuitive and very harmful for our county. All the other counties around the United Kingdom seem to be much more united and have a uniform voice when they are lobbying on behalf of our county. That is not the case here in Shropshire. But of course, when Owen Patterson was your MP and Philip Dunn was the MP for Ludlow, we had regular meetings with Shropshire Council every month where we discussed this problem with the leadership of the council, and we collectively wrote to the appropriate national companies to try to ensure that more investment came here to Shropshire. It's not the same problem for us in Shrewsbury and Telford as it is in North and South Shropshire. But I have taken individual companies to meet with operators in London and will continue from Shrewsbury and will continue to do so. The North West Relief Road has been mentioned by my Green opponent, and one of the biggest dangers to our economy is now the complexity and the power that is draining away from government, draining away from those who are meant to be delivering these projects for you, like MPs, like myself, like technicians, like Shrewsbury Business Chamber. It was Shrewsbury Business Chamber, the late Graham Gullies, some of you will remember, came to see me 10 years ago in his office. He put a massive a map of Shrewsbury on his desk, and he said to me, I expect you, as the MP, to secure the funding for the North West Relief Road, to complete the ring road around Shrewsbury. It is critical for our community. And this is a medieval town which is seeing a huge influx of people coming into Shrewsbury from the Black Country, from Birmingham. We have a massive construction of homes, a huge work practices are changing, huge numbers of people coming to this small medieval town, and it's struggling to cope with the traffic. And yet what happens? We have the Greens and others with enormous amount of power. Each individual has enormous amount of power to try to thwart and prevent these projects from taking place. We had the Secretary of State for Transport in Shrewsbury yesterday, Mark Harper, and I have secured £170 million from the government to complete the North West Relief Road. A specific instruction. This is a Member of Parliament listening to the business community, listening to the Shrewsbury Business Chamber. It was an instruction given to me as the Member of Parliament. I secured the initial funding in February 2019. We are still not at construction, and costs have massively gone up as a result of the delays. The latest delay, of course, from our friends at the Environment Agency, is because a bridge is being built relatively close to the aquifer where drinking water is extracted to provide water for Shrewsbury residents. We're not building a nuclear power station. We're not building some sort of a chemical plant. And by the way, the Victorians managed to build bridges quite happily without the interference of the Environment Agency. We've got to the stage, and whether it's HS2, I supported HS2, critical infrastructure project, The Victorians understood that you build not just for yourself, but you build for future generations. You plant a row of trees, you may not enjoy the shade, but those who follow you will take advantage of it. We have now reached a point where critical infrastructure projects, whether it's HS2, whether it's the North West Relief Road, are either being destroyed or their costs are rising massively because of the conduct of people like the Green candidate who seek to obstruct and oppose all of these essential infrastructure projects because of their obsession with the environment, not taking into consideration jobs and prosperity.
I'm going to open this up to the floor in a minute, Daniel, but just before, if anybody's got any questions or comments they want to say on that, and then I'll give our Green colleague an opportunity. Question in the third row here. Let's just, microphone on its way down to you, so here we go.
Thank you very much. I think businesses in Shrewsbury are interested in when the North West Relief Road will be built, and that any information on that will be helpful, but also on the town centre redevelopment, because that lots of planning applications, I believe, are being held up pending some visibility on when the redevelopment will take place. I don't know if the panel have any views on that.
I'll ask them in a minute. Just before you do, just a question just in front of you, if you can pass the microphone as well, and we'll...
Hi, Felicity Wingrove. I'm a small business owner, but I'm also here as one of the founding directors of Telford Business Board. So just picking up Daniel's point about the unification of the county. I believe we tried that with the LEP, which failed miserably, and the government pulled the entire proposition of LEPs and did what most business owners wanted them to do, which is ask business to provide a voice and instead put funding through local authorities. So it was leaner and much more targeted. We're doing quite well in Telford. We're quite happy to be ruling ourselves. So no, thank you.
Daniel, let me ask Julian to come in first before we do. Just
Thank you very much.
Let me give Julian.
I welcome Daniel claiming that I have enormous power. I have to disagree. I'm a single member of the planning committee. As it happens, I am a member of the planning committee, and I did vote against the road. I was overruled. The Conservatives have a majority. They've voted it through. We have three Conservative MPs in the county, as Daniel has said. We have a Conservative council. They haven't managed to get the road through. The reason they haven't managed to get the road through is because there are some absolutely legitimate concerns, which the Environment Agency is concerned about, Natural England is concerned about, and many other people are concerned about. Daniel seems to suggest that he should just be able to override that. That somehow power has seeped away from our MP towards these agencies who actually are looking after our environment for us. I think that would be extraordinarily dangerous if we were in a situation where MPs could override things in that way. Just the final point on this, Daniel is celebrating the fact that there's been 3 Tory MPs who've worked closely with Shropshire Council. Shropshire Council is now £62 million in debt this year, having already cut £50 million last year. So it's not a great track record of the 3 Tory MPs working with Shropshire Council.
Okay, thank you. Just very quickly.
I passionately disagree with the lady there who says, no, we're all right in Telford, thank you very much, we can do our own thing. One of the greatest things, there is nothing more important than the safety of patients at the hospital, and particularly the safety of patients in A&E. We have 2 hospitals, 13 miles, if you look at this auditorium here, that is Shropshire and Mid Wales. This whole building is Shropshire and Mid Wales. And these 2 little pinpricks next to each other, those are the 2 hospitals, just 13 miles apart. They cover the whole of Shropshire and Mid Wales. We secured £312 million 6.5 years ago for a modernisation of A&B services at our local hospital trust. And it wasn't me, it wasn't civil servants in London, it wasn't politicians. Due to the landscape reforms, the power for these changes has been moved towards people who are at the coalface of providing these services. The surgeons, doctors and clinicians who work in the hospital trust. 300 local surgeons came to us and said, for patient safety, the most important thing that we can do is a reconfiguration of services with the main A&E at Shrewsbury and women and children's services at Shrewsbury. That was 6.5 years ago. We secured £312 million, the biggest investment into the NHS in the history of Shropshire. 7 years on, we are only just now going to construction. And the tug of war that we have had with Telford, who refuse to understand the interdependence between both towns, is really, really damaging for the hospital trust and really damaging for our county.
Let me bring Row into this one then. Your response to that?
Talking of the NHS, I mean, we all owe it our lives to. And, you know, I was talking to an elderly lady in Old Brighton yesterday, and she said, I broke my hip and I waited 12 hours for an ambulance to arrive. And it was the horror that she spoke about was just unimaginable. We are one of the richest countries in the world with a bankrupted, crippled health service, education service. Every bit of our public services have been crippled. Telford and the Wrekin are being left without an A&E. Now, my son's sitting there. He was hit by a car when he was a child. The nightmare of any parent, just imagine that happens to your own child. That was the worst moment of my life. Think about it. You're in Telford, you'd need to wait for an ambulance or the A&E to be in Shrewsbury. You don't have access to it. Anything happens to your loved one, you'd need to go all the way from Telford or any part of the Wrekin to Shrewsbury. Who's done that? Daniel has done that, and he's proud of it. My director... And the,
These are two hospitals are 13 miles apart. They cover the whole of the
no, but I'm talking about... So what do you have to say to that lady who has to wait 12 hours for an ambulance, and when their ambulance arrives, he has to drive almost 25 miles to get her to an A&E? So it's everybody else's fault then? So it's somebody else's fault? So it is somebody else's fault? So you're forcing it through the people's throat. People are uniformly against it, but you're forcing the thing down their throat. No, my wife's a nurse. My wife's a nurse. You know what you've done to the NHS? I know it doesn't bother you because you earn enough money from the Saudis, and your colleague in the Wrekins, and your colleagues, and your colleague earns enough from his other 4 jobs. But you know, real people in the streets, in Telford, anywhere in Shropshire, you go and ask them, they're suffering because of your actions.
Let me give everybody else an opportunity then to have a speak. We've obviously gone into a little bit more into the hospital debate. Helen, what's your take? I mean, I guess one of the things the question that's sort of been skirted around here is one hospital enough? Where should it be? Should there be 2? You know, where are we at with all of this?
So I don't think I have any expertise in how to run a hospital or indeed how to build one. I'm a chartered accountant, and I have been given a briefing by clinical specialists at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust that given the budget that they have, the proposal that they have come up with is the best they can do. So is it the optimal solution that we could build with an endless budget? Probably not. Is it the best that some people who understand how to run a hospital can do? They think so, and therefore I'm inclined to support them. I don't always agree with Daniel, you won't be surprised to know, but he is right, those hospitals support not just the people of Shropshire, but the whole of the population of Mid Wales. It is a vast, vast area. And when we have challenged those clinical specialists on what if it takes me 20 minutes longer to get to A&E? What if I had a stroke and time is of the essence and it's going to take me 20 minutes longer to get to A&E? It's a really valid question, a really valid point. And of course, people are very, very worried about it. But their answer is, it is better to get the right treatment first time than to get the wrong treatment first time and then be transferred again to a different hospital. So I would like to have seen more money, a big new hospital. Of course I would. I'm a politician. I'd have liked to have seen a politician cut the ribbon on something shiny and new. That wasn't ever going to be the deal. And therefore, I think we have to trust the people who are responsible for delivering the services to do what they can. And as I say, I don't often agree with Daniel, but turning the provision of health services in a finite budget with a finite period of time into a 7-year political football, I don't think has served anybody in this county very well.
Let me give Alan and Julian a chance to have a say yet, because they haven't had a say on this. Julian, just...
As somebody who's been active in the campaign to defend the two A&Es in Shropshire, I have to say, first of all, that the clinicians are not all united on this issue. And also, we do actually, I think, have to take stock and take account of the fact that the leadership of Shrewsbury and Telford hospitals has not got a very good track record. The maternity care in this county has been a scandal, it has been criminal, and it has hit national headlines time and time again. So I'm not confident that we can take our lead from those same managers. But I would also say this, that I think it's not just about the A&Es, it's about a general drive towards centralising all the services. So we've lost local maternity care, we've been losing community hospitals, we've been losing access to all sorts of services which traditionally were much closer to people's homes. And going back to the point about connectivity, actually that business of local services close to people's homes is more sustainable, it's better for outcomes, for health outcomes. That's where the investment needs to be. So we need to roll back from the centralisation of these services. And actually, just to pick up on Helen's point, Helen said, and she used the words, given the budget. Well, I'm not accepting that. I don't think we have to accept the budget. I think we have to be fighting for the sort of investment in health in this country, which means that we can have a proper accident and emergency service for a 17,000 person town of Shrewsbury and the hinterland and Wales, and also for Telford, which has its own growing and young population. There's no reason why we shouldn't have emergency services in both of those centres. And I do not accept that we have to cut our cloth according to a shrinking budget, which is destroying the NHS.
Alan, just finish us off on this hospital debate.
I've never done one of these events before, so I didn't realise you just made up questions in your head and answered those. That's quite interesting. Just to go back to what the point that Felicity was making, I think she was talking about manufacturing. We've got very different needs in Telford. We're not rural, we're very manufactured based, so that was the point. On the hospital, I mean, we're going to be the largest town in the UK without a fully operational A&E, which just seems really strange to everybody in Telford that we're sort of losing some of our services. And I've forgotten what the original question was now because it was so long ago.
Well, it's just very much, where do you stand on the hospital debate?
Oh, yeah, I think that we should have maybe more money and keep the A&E fully operational in Telford as well as having one in Shrewsbury. I completely get that we're serving sort of a wider, going into Wales with Shrewsbury, but we're quite a growing population in Telford and we need a fully operational A&E.
I'm conscious we could probably talk about this one all night, and by keeping an eye on the time, there's loads of other things I want to get through. So if it's all right with you, I'll change the subject completely now, folks. Very briefly, Dan, just briefly.
I'm very grateful to the lady who's asked about the town centre, because of course Shrewsbury has more listed buildings than any other town in England. Tourism is our #1 income generator, and yet the whole of the centre of Shrewsbury, the Riverside Shopping Centre and all of that area, is obviously 1970s, falling apart, redundant and completely dilapidated. I secured funding from the Levelling Up Fund, the only successful bid for Shropshire from the Levelling Up Fund, and Mark Barrow at Shropshire Council tells me that as they rescope, that funding, by the way, is going to be the seed funding, the catalyst for a whole redevelopment and reconstruction of Shrewsbury Town Centre. That's going to provide huge new opportunities for the construction of new services, new accommodation, office accommodation, hotel accommodation. It's going to become the biggest brownfield site development in Shropshire, and it's potentially going to attract hundreds of millions of pounds of private sector investment in Shrewsbury. So I'm very proud to have secured that funding from the Levelling Up Fund.
Okay, that's brief enough, I think so. Thank you. Let me change the subject now to business rates. This is another one of the big questions that's always prevalent in the quarterly economic surveys. The business community in Shropshire seems to widely accept that the current business rate system is in need of modernisation and reform. So my question really to the panel is, how can we bring the system into the 21st century? And is there anything else you think needs to be done to simplify other things like planning rules, local government bureaucracy, updating systems to support businesses? Helen, do you want to start us off on this one?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'd like to start on business rates because there has been an Act of Parliament passed in the last couple of years called the Non-Domestic Rating Reform Act, was a bill. And it was a bit of a missed opportunity, if I'm completely honest, to really deal with this problem of business rates. So fundamentally, I believe, Liberal Democrats believe that we should rip up the business rates rule book and start again. Because as it stands, you're charged a premium if you're on a high street. So it's immediately weighted against physical shops for the retail sector and in favour of internet businesses, which is unfair and unhelpful when we're trying to regenerate town centres and bring people together. But also, even if you're in a different sector, because your rateable value is higher if you've invested in that property and improved it, you're kind of disincentivised to improve and invest in the land and buildings that you have. So we would start again and just look at the value of the land and tax it in that way. Obviously, we haven't had that opportunity in the last Parliament. We have had an opportunity with non-domestic rating reform to improve some of the suggestions that the government made. So, for example, there was an amendment tabled for annual revaluation, which I think would have been a really good opportunity to seize. It works elsewhere in Europe. The Dutch do it. We could easily have done those annual revaluations, which would at least have kept business rates up to date. There's some pretty awful stuff in that Act around the Valuation Office Agency, which requires you to annually inform the Valuation Office Agency of whether or not your premises has changed. The Valuation Office Agency I used to deal with on a regular basis in my previous job, and they're a really problematic agency to deal with. They don't come back to you on time, and you can be fined now if you don't provide your information to the Valuation Office Agency. But they have no right or targets with which they must respond to you. So I think that legislation was poorly put together. I put down some amendments on it. I actually had some support from a Conservative MP called Peter Aldous. It was a bit of a missed opportunity. We could have done better with that piece of legislation, and Liberal Democrats would entirely start again with business rates.
Ro?
You know, if you look around you, the world, and not just Britain, we're not in isolation. We've gone through a horrendous period, and the post-COVID, post-Ukraine world is an entirely different one we're living in. And that has an impact on the high street. So anywhere you go, you're impacted by anything that goes, and it impacts small businesses as well. So I wasn't in Albrighton speaking to small business owners, shopkeepers, and the key question was how outdated the business rate system was. And I understand, and our party, as we've said, the key to progress is stabilising the economy, bringing stability, political stability at the top of the government. But we will reform and get rid of the outdated business rate system, and we'll replace it with something that is fairer and fits the modern economy.
And as we mentioned in the question as well, does the same go for some of the other things like planning rules and red tape?
Yeah, so all of that.
How wide-ranging would the reforms be?
You know, you wouldn't expect me to be here spelling out what will be in our manifesto, but I understand and I know that businesses are clamouring for certainty, and that is the cornerstone of growth. And I will be there with the business to ensure that we get that. But yeah, so, planning system, that is something that we're looking at, but business rates, of course, that has to be, part of the package.
Thank you. Alan?
Okay, so I don't want to answer a question that hasn't been asked, but obviously, Reform UK, it's very business-led. Okay, so the books have to add up, and they've put together a package that's going to save us 146 billion. Okay, the spending we're going to talk about, because I'm going to talk about the rates in a second, they're looking to spend 141 billion to help this country grow. We have to grow our way to success. So one of the things they're doing, they're going to abolish high street rates, launch a 4% online delivery tax to sort of level it with the high streets there, and also review the planning system and absolutely be able to help people fast track brownfield sites and redevelop empty offices and shop fronts, that kind of thing. So that's where we are.
Okay, Julian?
Thank you. Two thoughts here. So first of all, actually, similarly to Helen, the Green Party supports a land value tax and abolition of the business rate system, completely crazy tax system we have, which has grown up over decades, perhaps centuries. We could simplify it with a land value tax, which would replace a whole gamut of place-based taxes, and we could also simplify the income tax situation as well. And then we are in favour of a wealth tax, which would really begin to bring in the billions of pounds we need by taxing the very wealthiest, the millionaires and the billionaires in this country, and the wealth which is locked away. We would also want to tweak that because, and this is my second point, because people have in the panel have referred to growth as if that is something completely neutral. Let's be clear that in this country we measure growth with GDP. A car crash contributes to GDP. A heavily polluting company which uses lots of resources contributes more to GDP than a company which uses little resources and doesn't pollute so much. So GDP is entirely the wrong measure for economic success and well-being. So we would be looking to introduce incentives to drive growth where it is needed. And that means that, for example, right now, if you want to retrofit your building, if you want to introduce renewable energy or reduce your energy footprint, then the investment actually attracts the same VAT rate as if you were just building an extension. That's stupid. We need to revise the VAT rules, for example, so that investment in renewable technology is actually zero rated or certainly lower rated than other sorts of investment. So I think it's about tweaking the taxes. First of all, as I've said, abolishing the business rate system and having something much more sensible, but also then using the tax system. The tax system has three purposes, doesn't it? It's to pay for services, it's to do some redistribution because we know otherwise the country would be even more unequal, and it's also to drive change and to drive behaviour change and to drive economic activity where we want it and away from where we don't want it. We don't use it effectively to do that. We could use the tax system much more effectively to absolutely incentivise the sorts of green transition that we absolutely need. And I would finally say that actually it is small and local businesses which will be key to that. All of the calculations that look at net zero say if you do it locally, if you start it by enabling local government and local investment, actually it's more efficient, it's better for local people. That's the way to do it, rather than imagining that it's going to all be done for us by Serco or Michelle Mone.
Okay, Daniel, business rates, what do we do?
Well, I mean, whether it's business rates or whether it's corporation tax, which is far too high, whether it's personal taxation, which is far too high, we are paying more in taxation at the moment than we have for many generations. And that is the result of the £450 billion that we had to borrow during the pandemic. And so at the end of the day, you can only really start to reduce taxation, whether it's business rates or corporation tax, if you are not overspending as a government. And I met with a bar owner in Shrewsbury the other day to do a podcast with him, Libertines, and he said to me he wanted VAT on food in restaurants to be wiped out because he feels that there is a huge pressure on the restaurants and bars in Shrewsbury, and they are struggling to make ends meet. And yet we've just had today a warning from the IMF that the net zero commitments from the Labour Party are really dangerous for additional borrowing requirement that would be needed in order to comply with those net zero regulations which the Labour Party want to implement. Let's not forget one thing. The United Kingdom represents less than 1% of CO2 emissions. The United Kingdom has reduced CO2 emissions at a faster rate than any other of the industrialized G20 nations. So we've already reduced CO2 emissions faster. And yet these people here want us to impose even more regulations, even more movement. And as I said to some young people the other day, you know, we have become the world's 4th largest exporter, but we are in a Herculean competitive battle with the Chinas of this world, with the Brazils of this world, with the Indias of this world. And if we over-regulate and overtax our companies, we will become less competitive and our economy will falter.
We've got a couple of questions that go into this topic in a little bit more detail, Danny, so I don't want to jump the gun too much on this one. We'll look at this. There's 2 or 3 other topics here that I want to touch on before we finish. Before I do, though, has anybody got any observations, questions on this? Yeah, gentleman at the front here, can we get a microphone down to you? Thank you. Let's give Alex some exercise.
Hi, it's Les Maguire. We keep touching on the green agenda. One of the reasons we've pulled away slightly from the green agenda is because of many of the discussions we're having tonight. Is the cost. It's the cost that it will cost the country, for a start, and it's the cost that it will cost the individual house owner. It would cost me for my house to be green, if you like, with solar panels, with wall insulation, and with air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps, about £30,000. So by forcing that on to us individual homeowners, it's only going to add to the pressures of our already struggling household. So I can see exactly why the government has pulled away from it slightly. And as Daniel said, we are at a 1%. We already produce only 1% to the country, to the world, compared to all the other countries. So do we want to be putting that pressure on the government and on the taxpayer? And do we want to be putting more pressure on the homeowner by forcing us to go more green than we already are?
Thank you. We'll pick that one up in a minute. There was another couple there. Who else had their hand in the air? Can we get one over to the end, just behind you there? That's it up there.
Thank you. Liam Scott. Just a comment on the NHS and the Telford and Shrewsbury Hospital debate, and just to point out to Daniel very, very specifically, had Telford Hospital not have been there 5 years ago for me to attend when I needed A&E, I'd have been dead before I made it to Shrewsbury. Confirmed by the doctors at Telford Hospital on multiple occasions. So for whatever reason we have that delay, thank you, and make sure that we have a fully functioning NHS that works at the point of service when we need it, not a broken apart process where if I need one particular type of treatment over another, I need to go to a different hospital. Absolutely ludicrous as an idea. Thank you.
And was there anybody else? There's one more hand. There's 2 more hands in the air here. Let's pick up these 2 as well, and then we'll come back to the panel.
Hi, Carl. I'd like to just rewind a couple of bits, and I'd like to invite the panel not to start drawing swords and fighting each other, because there's actually a question about your party policies, and which is actually what most people have come to hear about, not about how you don't like each other and what you do. So if we can just have a look at a couple of things. One is our mobile telephony. Okay, we can kid ourselves as much as we like, but these are commercial entities that run these things. Okay, so they will put masts where there's big populations because they can sell lots of airtime contracts and make loads of money. We live out in the sticks. I live just down the road here, so I'm one of Helen's. And the reality is the mobile signals are appalling. And you know, I've travelled many places in the world, and it's never ever been as bad as it is here. But that's the story. But what we have here is we have shareholders driving commercial entities who are effectively preventing them investing. Now, I'd like to know if any of these parties here before us have some sort of policies in place behind the scenes, or that they can share, where they can actually put some form of decent regulation on these organisations to say, you're making all this money, but you will invest in rural communities. So that's a question to the panel about their party policies. There's another observation I'd like to make on something that has passed, and that is the NHS, which obviously is dear to everybody's heart. I've had cause to use that with both my parents recently, and unfortunately both of them have been very sad outcomes. But the reality is, when you look at it, the whole thing is just jammed up. and it's outside of the NHS. The people in there are giving their all in almost every case. But they can't get people out of hospital. My father was in hospital for 6 weeks. They wanted him out in a week. There's nowhere for him to go. There's no social care infrastructure to support it. So I'd like to know from each of these parties what they're going to be doing about that situation. And the final point, prevention is better than cure. And we know there are significant ailments around our society today, obesity being one. I've got some timber on as well, so that's one down to me. But I think the big issue we need to consider around our mental health support and where the support is for people with mental health issues. We're on a specific business event this evening. Deloitte did some research into businesses and the impact of mental health on business. The impact was £19 billion from their research. To build a new hospital in the UK, it costs on average £500 million, or certainly has from historical, because we haven't built many recently. So that's a vast number of new hospitals that we're missing out on just because of the economic impact within business that mental health issues are having. And this is people who are employed or are affected by family and friends with mental health. Preventative is so important. So I'd like to know again where the parties stand on this and what policies they've got in place, because we aren't here to hear sabre rattling, as I've said already. We're here to hear about what your parties are going to do for our country. So I'd like the answers, please.
Thanks, Richard. Let me just get this one final question, then we'll go through some of these issues that have been raised.
Kerry Trigg from the Wrekin Housing Group. I'd like to just pick up on something Helen mentioned earlier, if I might. She said about there being a bit of a struggle in parts of Shropshire to retain and attract a workforce, and housing being part of that problem. At Wrekin, we've got 28,000 people living in our properties at the moment, but we know there are a lot more people in housing need in the county. So I'd like to know what the candidates and their parties would do to help us solve that.
Okay, then let's start with that one then. I mean, Helen, you mentioned that you made reference to that. Do you want to kick us off with that?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, the gentleman at the top, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your parents. That's a really sad way to start the question. I'm going to go backwards through your points, if that's okay. We announced yesterday a package of social care support to try and improve the situation, not only for carers in this country, but also to ease pressure on the NHS. So that would, I won't go into all of the detail because we haven't got very long, but basically to attract more people to work in social care and to provide free personal care for people so that they don't have to sell their home when they need that care in the community. To ease pressure on the NHS, and because generally speaking, people recover better at home where they feel safe and comfortable than they do in hospital. But it's only possible if the carers are there to support them. And so we've got provision of social care at the centre of our policy offer because we take it so seriously and we consider it to be a top priority for the country. We've also pledged a big sum of money for public health projects which would be delivered by local authorities across the country because prevention is so much cheaper than treatment. So whether you're talking about sort of obesity or healthy lifestyle type stuff, or whether you're talking about mental health, prevention is so much more important than treatment because it's more effective and it's more cost effective. Mental health support is part of that. So as an MP, I've dealt with an awful lot of harrowing casework of people who haven't been able to access mental health support until they've been in crisis. And that's an awful outcome for that individual, and it's an awful outcome for everybody else as well. So one of the core elements of our manifesto has been a mental health professional in every school, because young people in particular, particularly after COVID, seem to be struggling with their mental health. And again, prevention, early intervention is so much more effective than leaving somebody to get into crisis. Now, I know the question that follows that is, how are you going to pay for it? Specifically, the mental health support would be paid for by a tax on social media giants, because that seems to be where some of that pressure is coming from. And the social care policy, the manifesto will be out next week and it will be fully costed, but there are a number of areas where we feel that we can find that money without putting taxes up on working people. Mobile phone signal, you mentioned at the top, and again, lots of stories from people locally where they've been waiting for a call for the hospital and they've had to kind of go and stand in the end of the garden in the windswept dark to try and get that call to come through because they can't speak to somebody in their own home. It's awful. The shared rail network identified that where somebody had already put up a mast, so that was commercially viable. And that's why they introduced the shared rail network. If it's commercially viable for EE, it ought to be also commercially viable for all the other mobile network operators. And so we have to absolutely regulate them and make sure that they are sharing their equipment properly. And if they won't do it, that they are allowing people to roam between masts. And that's the bit of legislation that I put down and I will continue to press for.
Thank you. Daniel, do you want to pick up on some of these points? Yeah.
I go back to my point to answer the question about local hospital services. I go back to my earlier point. A key concept of emotional intelligence is the word interdependence. Telford and Shrewsbury are and should be totally interdependent. We are all Salopians at the end of the day. And my experience as a Member of Parliament is that this single biggest issue that I have spent more time on, and other Shropshire MPs have spent more time on, fighting, is this issue of the modernisation of A&E services at our hospital trust. 2 hospitals, 13 miles apart, just 13 miles apart, covering the whole of Shropshire and Mid Wales. 2 hospitals that are totally interdependent with one another within one hospital trust. And yet we have a Labour council leader, Sean Davis, who has 0 medical qualifications, using his position and the council and the resources of the council to threaten, bully, cajole, and to prevent these changes from happening. And what I would say to you, sir, is don't take my word for why these changes are so critical. Everybody in this audience either has a family member or a friend who works in the local NHS trust. Go to them, ask them what they think about the reconfiguration of hospital services. And they will tell you, I'm pretty confident that the vast majority of people you speak to will say, we want to make these changes are essential for patient safety. And the most important thing to say to this gentleman here, when I spoke to a surgeon, doesn't matter where your A&E is. What matters is time to knife. That's what the surgeons say, time to knife. How long does it take you to get from your home in an ambulance onto the operating theatre and for them to cut you up? That's what matters. And that is what the doctors are trying to do, to reconfigure services to ensure that we have maximum efficiency within the hospital trust. I will never forgive Sean Davis, the Labour leader of Telford Council, what he has done. And if you're interested, sir, in understanding the horrendous problems that we've had, and by the way, it's you who's paying. It's you who's paying as a taxpayer. This money should have been spent 6 years ago, and costs have been rising. That is why I say we need one council for the whole of Shropshire, and we need to get into the mindset that we are all interdependent, we are all Salopians, and we should be working together for the betterment of our whole county.
Thank
and
you.
then lastly, may I just say that the NHS this year is receiving £189 billion of your money. That's more than 90% of the world's countries have to pay for everything. The NHS is the 5th largest employer in the world, and yet we see a situation where they can't make a decision over 7 years as to how to comply with the wishes of the surgeons.
Okay, we're going over ground we've covered already now, aren't we? So
during the pandemic,
Daniel, give somebody else a chance to have a say.
Oh, please, can I just finish?
We've only got 10 minutes to talk now, and you've had more than your fair share on that one, I think. Ro, do you want to give us a...
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm really, really sorry about your loss, and I do feel your pain, because it was during lockdown in 2020, that I had an epileptic seizure 100 miles away from home. I owe my life to the NHS, as you do, as so many other people do. I was at a motorway service station and he was there with me. Had an ambulance arrived 2 minutes late, I would have been dead. And that is true for a lot of people. My wife's a nurse. You know, she came here as a refugee the same way I did. She learned English, went to college, went to university. She's a nurse. She leaves home 6 in the morning, comes home 9 in the evening. And the amount of work that they had to do, she's dedicated to it because she knows the work is valued. But they're overworked, underpaid, and the patients, we've got 7.5 million people waiting. Now, any person untreated for any ailment adds on to that list. If you don't have, it's public health service, not public health luxury. It shouldn't be looked at as if this is a luxury, you can have it or you cannot have it. It's a need, it's a right in this country that you should have a public health service accessible at the point of use, available to you when you need it. You know, it doesn't matter how much we pay or how many billions is paid. You've had 14 years and you've wrecked it. You've wrecked it and you've left us with 7.5 million people waiting and just counting and counting.
Okay, does anybody else want to pick, Julian, do you want to pick up on any of the points that have been raised from the hall here before we move on?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all your questions. And there's no way I can be able to remember all the detail from the Green Party's policy documents. And as all the other parties, we haven't yet published our manifesto, but I'll have a go. So first of all, in terms of the issue of regulation and the challenge to provide services commercially, it doesn't always work, does it? Look at water, look at rail. Quite clearly, we have to have a mixed economy, and we have to have, I like the term mission economy. There's a fantastic book I would recommend to everybody by an economist called Mario Mazzucato called The Mission Economy, which is brilliant about how you create a mixed economy which actually achieves something rather than just an abstract growth figure. It actually achieves some very, very specific outcomes. And those include connectivity, they include public transport, they include clean water, they include clean rivers. So we need the regulation and we need to design our economy so that it actually delivers some specific outcomes rather than just abstract numbers. On the issue of social care, very pleased to hear that the Lib Dems have had an announcement on that, so has the Green Party. Frankly, I suspect we may well get to the end of this election where the two main parties have continued to remain silent on social care, as they have done for 10, 15 years. The social care crisis is one of the reasons why the NHS is falling over, and it simply has not been adequately addressed. And one of the reasons it hasn't been adequately addressed is because we do not have the workers, we do not have the skills, and part of the reason for that actually is our stepping away from freedom of movement, and again, something that the big parties will simply not talk about, but I would support the return of freedom of movement, which I think would be part of the solution for social care. On Kerry's questions about housing, so the Green Party has some very, very specific policies. We want to see 150,000 council homes built per year. We absolutely think that the fact that social housing has become some sort of ghetto is appalling. So many people grew up in perfectly respectable council homes throughout the 50s and 60s. We need to see a return to that because our housing market is not delivering the homes that people need. It's delivering unaffordable homes in places which are not sustainable. We need to deal with the rent issue. My child in London has been paying ludicrous rents for one room, which actually used to be the living room in that flat. It's just mad. So we have to bring rents under control, and we also have to bring many buildings back into use, and so we would give powers to local authorities to bring homes back into use, to bring other buildings into use, to convert them. There was also the question of mental health. I could go on for ages, because I think that the world we live in, where people are being straitjacketed into specific types of roles, whereas, you know, back in the day, there was a variety of roles which would have suited people with different aptitudes. You know, we now are uncovering a whole world of neurodiversity, which has always been there. It's just that the opportunity to be a carpenter or to do something with your hands or to do something which didn't require literacy skills, didn't require computer skills, all of those things have disappeared from our society. We're all being straitjacketed into very similar roles. I think that's one of the reasons, but only one of the reasons for the mental health crisis. But I don't understand it in full, but clearly it needs addressing. I think I'll leave it there.
Conscious of time, you can't go on for ages. We've only got 10 minutes left. Alan, do you want to just pick up any of these points that have been mentioned in the panel before the final question?
Yeah, just on the NHS, obviously, NHS spend per head is very similar to the rest of Europe, but we have the worst outcomes in Europe. And that's down to mismanagement, bureaucracy, cover-ups, scandals. And so our pledges, and I can't go through all the details right now because we're going to run out of time, but if anyone wants to come and talk to me about it, I've got them here. We're going to use the private sector to actually clear the waiting list. And don't forget, all this money's been accounted for. We can afford it if we make the changes we need to make. Just on the social care side of things, I mean, it's very separate. You've got NHS, then you have social care, and there's no joined up. So what they've actually said is they're going to have an inquiry into it and look at how we make more joined up so that they're not fighting each other, basically. And you talked about net zero briefly. It's, obviously, Reform Party were quite anti-net zero because it costs jobs. It's not feasible. I can't. The gentleman down here said, I can't afford 15 grand for a heat pump, and nor can most of the people in Telford. So it's about sensible things. It's about getting jobs. Stop sending money abroad to countries to supply us with all these renewables, because it just isn't working. We're getting rid of our own money and we're funding authoritarian countries.
You've paved the way neatly to the final question that I just wanted to ask everybody tonight, Alan, which is one that several businesses have asked us to raise, and it is around the issue of sustainability and net zero. The question basically is, are we putting too much pressure on businesses to achieve net zero, or should we be doing more? Do you want to start us off on this one, Julian?
So net zero is the biggest economic opportunity that we have. The levels of investment and opportunity that exists in retrofitting homes, in introducing sustainable transport, in dealing with the big three emitters in this country are energy. It's true that we have largely cracked. We will probably get to a zero emissions energy system, but we need substantially more investment in that. But that one is in sight. The ones which aren't in sight are dealing with transport and dealing with the heating in buildings. So we absolutely need to do that. The cost of not doing it, by the way, on the world scale, is just horrendous. So it's not really that much of a choice. So therefore, we have to find a way of doing it which absolutely provides opportunity, which provides livings for people, livelihoods for people, and also actually delivers homes which are more comfortable, cheaper to heat, more healthy. So all of that needs to be doing. Now, I don't think that can be done with simply one person at a time having to go into their own pocket to do that work on their homes. I absolutely agree with you. That's not a realistic option. We absolutely are going to need huge scales of investment to allow that to happen. And that is doable. That is doable. We've started doing it in social housing. There's a social housing decarbonisation fund. There have been grants available, but we absolutely need to roll that out much, much more substantially. But I would also say that investing in homes is something that everybody does. Most home owners at some stage or another will have invested in their home. This is an investment in your home for its future, for a future generation, to make it sustainable, to make it comfortable, and to give us all a future. So I think my main story here is that net zero is a huge economic opportunity. It is a scandal that the UK, on the edge of Europe, the windiest part of Europe, imports the parts for wind turbines. An absolute scandal. The Tory government has completely failed to support that industry.
Let me give everybody else, I'm conscious of the time, Julian, but Ro, let me bring you in on this one. Just net zero, are we putting too much pressure on businesses, or are we doing more?
If you look at it, it's about how we look at the future and what we owe the future generations. I mean, we spent £117 billion on importing energy from outside, and that means being dependent on Putin, being dependent on autocrats in the Middle East. Net zero, whatever you want to frame it, we have to look at it as an opportunity for future growth for businesses, an opportunity where you invest for the future, the jobs of the future, technologies of the future, and the AI is now revolutionizing everything that we're looking at, from public services to the health and the infrastructure. So we have to have a holistic approach as to where we go. And now how we do that, we have to be open to debate and bring communities with us. I mean, he mentioned wind farms. And of course, there are people, communities who are worried about, and, about their farms, about their businesses, about the infrastructure around the area. We should be able to have that debate and openly. And if we disagree, we have to come up for the sake of our future with a comprehensive, workable, but we shouldn't look at it as a zero-sum game to the bottom. Whether you go for a net zero economy means you're losing. It's an opportunity that we should grasp. We're already following our competitors. The Europeans are doing it. We're not doing it. Americans are at it. We're not at it. We have to be at it to protect our future.
Daniel, net zero, we're putting too much pressure on businesses, or should we be doing more?
Yeah, we obviously, as I've said already, we have reduced CO2 emissions at a faster rate than all of our major competitors. We destroyed the Bildwas power station in my constituency, blew that up. Of course, China is constructing 2 Bildwas power stations every week, and yet we are in competition with the Chinese over manufacturing and all the other things. I was asked by the Daily Express, what would you like in the manifesto? And I said, scrap these net zero regulations for businesses and individual homes because of the sheer costs and how they are destroying household incomes and blunting our competitive edge. But I'm very disappointed that we've had no questions this evening on probably the single most important issue affecting us all at this general election. We made a fundamental decision a few years ago to leave the European Union. And that is all at risk now from a Labour government. We just entered, the Shropshire Chamber of Commerce came to see me in the House of Commons the other day and said, we have just entered the world's largest trading bloc in the world, the CPTPP, the only European country to have been invited to join the world's largest trading bloc. In 1980, the European Union represented 25% of the world economy. Today, it represents 10%. This is the fastest shrinking market in the world, and the United Kingdom is the only European country to have entered the Far East trading bloc, which has billions of new middle-class consumers desperate for British consumer goods. What are the ramifications for you as Shropshire businesses for your export opportunities? And I speak as one of the Prime Minister's trade envoys. Huge opportunities. Selling internally is money swimming around the system. It's relevant because all the questions have been asking us about spending money. And you can't spend money unless you have a strong economy and strong exports. Starla will take us back into the European Union, a massively shrinking market, and then we won't be able to pay for all of the things that these people require.
Okay, we're nearly out of time. Alan, just want to give us your take, net zero?
Yeah, so net zero, obviously, it's causing more damage to the economy and the people than it's actually proving worth. The national grid is going to cost £2 trillion or even more. Okay, so the Reform Party is all for ditching, using sensible policies and ditching it. It's just about sort of growth. It's the businesses that matter. It's the people that matter. Like I said, I mean, it's all great. Yes, we do invest in our houses, but like I say, we can't afford 15 grand for the average person can't afford 15 grand for a heat source pump or more for sort of solar panels. I mean, it's just about being sensible with these things. I mean, yeah, let's do stuff. The environment's important. Let's look after it, but not at the cost of tens of thousands of jobs.
Helen?
So I mentioned at the beginning that I was head of margin forecasting at British Gas back in the day. And I just want to talk a little bit about energy costs, because energy costs have been a huge issue for businesses, and a little bit about gas, because it's one of my favourite topics. So the reason we decarbonise so quickly is because we switched off our coal fleet power station and invested in gas instead. And gas is much cleaner. But the problem with that is that we have been a net importer of gas since about the turn of the century. And that means that we are the taker of the gas price on the world market. So when there's a war in Ukraine, we've got a huge proportion of gas in our energy mix, and we are exposed to that fluctuation in the world gas price market. And so we need to wean ourselves off gas, not only because we need to do that because we need to be reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, but because we need to be making ourselves energy secure for the future and not dependent on essentially murderous regimes across the world for our energy. And so renewables are a really, really important part of that. In the long run, they will make our bills cheaper, they will make us energy secure, and we won't be buying our energy at a world price market price. So yes, it needs investment. I agree. You shouldn't have to stump up £15,000 yourself for a heat pump, and especially not if you're not ready to replace your existing arrangements. But we do need to recognise that burning fossil fuels puts us at the mercy of a very unstable world, and we need to be energy secure. And the way to do that is to look at the resources that we have here, which are, it's very windy, we have the biggest tidal range in the world, and we can do this if we have a diverse range of renewable resources and we give ourselves the energy security that we deserve.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time, so I just want to finish the way we started tonight and invite all the candidates to give us a 60 to 90 seconds summary. And the question is this: if you're elected to represent the people of Shropshire at the general election, what do you feel is the single most important task to support the business community? What's the first thing you would do when you get behind your desk to support local businesses? Let's go from near to far. Ro, do you want to start us off with this one?
It is the most important thing is to acknowledge that things have been incredibly difficult over the past 14 years and we're falling behind, but things don't have to be this way. You know, the 14 years of Tory chaos and failure should not define Britain's future. Despite all they have done, this is a wonderful country, a great country, and Shropshire, a wonderful place for business. But we need to be open. We need to have a government that is competent, that is credible, that is respected internationally. What they've done is they've wrecked our public services, denigrated our place in the world, weakened our defences. But we can do better than that. And businesses can do better than that. We can provide that assurance to business and work with them to ensure that the businesses get the right support, that Britain's thriving. We are a great country. We should be proud of what we have.
Perfectly 60 seconds. You set the bar. Julian?
Thank you very much. Specifically in terms of Shropshire, I think a game changer would be a really significant plan for local public transport to really deal with the connectivity, to deal with the access to skills training for young people. I think it would be a game changer if we could really tackle our local public transport network. On the general point, clearly the Tories are toast. And in that situation, I would appeal to people to recognise that, unfortunately, Labour is not offering the scale of change that we really need. But a group of Green MPs are going to be there as a conscience to push them to make sure that we do keep talking about the sort of investment that we really do need to make the transition to a fairer, greener country.
Helen?
Thank you. Well, the top issue that local businesses have raised with me is this problem of staff shortages of skilled people to work in their business. So that would have to be my top priority as a Shropshire MP. What can you do to resolve that quickly? I think there are 3 areas. I agree with Julian about public transport. I think it's really important. There's the digital connectivity point that we've talked about endlessly. I'm sorry I didn't answer your question on housing, but I would prioritise that. And I would work with local education providers to make sure that the school leavers that we have the skills they need to work in local businesses and that they stay in the local area.
Thank you. Daniel?
Well, it's something I always talk to the Chancellor about when I have private meetings with him, and that is cut corporation tax. We now have, how many Britons do you think live in the United Arab Emirates? 400,000. Some of our top professionals are leaving this country to look for jurisdictions which are cheaper for their companies. My best friend from university, multimillionaire, international architects firm, and he said to me, I pay 9% corporation tax on anything I earn over £90,000. Can you match that? Of course we can't. But we are hemorrhaging our brightest and wealth creators from this country because of high taxation. The socialists, as always, will increase taxation and make your lives more difficult because of their spending commitments which they're making. £38 billion black hole, and as the Prime Minister said, an additional £2,000 per person in taxation. The Prime Minister has turned the corner with the economy. Stick with the Conservative Party and ensure that we continue now in a post-pandemic world to continue to reduce national corporation tax and personal taxation.
Thank you, Daniel. That's perfect. And Alan?
It's about making being in business easier. Over the last decade, I've talked to thousands of business owners, and the amount of business owners I actually talk to where they're not the highest hourly paid person in their own business is absolutely shocking. It's about making business easier. So Reform UK, we plan to cut corporation tax to zero for anyone earning under £100,000 profit. We're going to cut corporation tax to 20%, then 5%, another 5% in the future. We're going to lift the VAT threshold to 120,000. And we're going to abolish the IR35 rule that punishes people who just happen to have like a single type employer.
Thank you. Well, by my reckoning, we've covered 11 of the 14 topics that we had on the original sheet tonight, so we've not done too badly. Can I just say on behalf of Shropshire Chamber of Commerce, thank you so much for coming tonight. I hope you found it an interesting debate. It has been filmed, as you see. It will be available to watch back on YouTube or share over the next few days. But can we say a big thank you to the candidates who've given up their time tonight? And if there's anything else you want to pick up with any of the members of the Chamber team while they're here, Ruth and other members of the crew are around. But thank you for coming, and thank you very much, panel, for your time. Thank you very much.